students are gone, but you are still here. And we know how you feel because you are done. But you have so much work to do to get ready for tomorrow. Good afternoon, podcast listeners everywhere. Welcome to After the Bell, a Stunt Brothers production. A podcast that gets inside the life of a teacher and provides a wellness guide for being prepared to take on this most challenging of professions. I'm Martin Stuvel.
And I'm Roy Hunt. And we share your pain, having taught a combined 70 years. The guarantee of this podcast is to make you laugh, make you think, and give you at least one little nugget that you can use in the classroom. So get out your marking, organize your supplies, or just pour yourself a coffee.
I want something stronger.
And listen, engage, and interact with After the Bell, a podcast for you, the hard-working, dedicated teacher who wants free lesson plans, free advice, and a free meal.
Okay, Roy, but I'm not paying for anything more than McDonald's. Our second bonus episode, 10B.
10B.
You're well into your spring break, I hope, for those that have one. Maybe some of you are starting your spring break, or maybe some of you have that coming next week. But this is our second bonus.
There you go.
And who do we got on this week in the interview? What did we decide? We had a little discussion about it.
We called it the Fieldtrip Interviews.
Yes, okay. So this is part two, right, of our field trip of the interviews we've done so far.
Yes, and in this one, we will have Pius Ryan, the Superintendent of School District 44.
Yeah, and then we'll have Robin Deleurme and Katrina Russell from the North Vancouver Teachers Association, the local union here in North Vancouver. And everybody else, we'll see you back March 31st with a brand new episode, episode 10. Looking forward to hearing and talking to you guys again.
Fantastic.
So here we are. We call this The Box, our studio here. And we have Dr. Pius Ryan with us, and we're really looking forward to this conversation. Now, we always start off with a bit of an icebreaker.
Oof.
Just quick little things.
Go for it.
Just to see how it goes. And whatever pops into your mind, just say first thing.
That could be scary, but let's see. Let's see what happens.
Okay. Recess or lunch?
Recess.
Apple or banana?
Oof. Banana.
Socials or science?
Socials.
Okay. What was your favorite book as a child?
Ooh, interesting. Ironically, I have an English degree, but I didn't read a lot as a child. Misspent childhood, but the favorite book and the first book I probably really read was Moonfleet by William Faulkner.
If you could have only one piece of music that you had to listen to for the rest of your life, you don't have to play it over and over again. You can play it when you want, but you only get one piece of music. What would it be?
Wow. I guess, I'm sure this answer to this question happened to be different every time you ask it. But I was speaking to someone yesterday about guitar players, and so I would say Telegraph Road by Dire Straits.
Yes.
Because it's just a brilliant tune.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So,
have you seen the Dylan film?
I have.
I'm going tonight.
Yeah, I'm not a moviegoer at all, and my wife figured I needed to get out of the house on this weekend, so she brought me to the movie, and it was
I heard good things.
It's
really
good.
Good
It's good. Yeah, they did a good job.
Okay.
Who was your favorite teacher growing up, and why?
Oh gosh, I'm sure many of my teachers thought I was a pain. Miss Abbott comes to mind. She's my grade 5 teacher, and she was an excellent teacher. She made me they used chalk at the time, the good technology, and she made me write out the verses of the Bible many times. But she was a lovely, caring, but yet firm teacher.
Okay, great. I have a bonus one. Here we go. A little surprise. Newfoundland time or Pacific time? It's always, listen to CBC. It was always like, and 9:30 in Newfoundland.
Yeah, half an hour later. Well, I've been in BC an awful long time, but I do love the notion. There's a song about Newfoundland that it talks about took God, as it's like 6 days to create the world, and he spent a half an hour singularly on Newfoundland. So let's just put that out there.
Okay. Here we go. So as I said, our theme for this episode is leadership.
Yeah.
What have you learned about leadership in your journey to become a superintendent in a school district with 16,000 students? Maybe tell us a little bit about your journey from Newfoundland to North Vancouver.
Sure. Because I think of literally and figuratively, the journey from Newfoundland, like that's a long ways from here. And I think that's the same thing as the journey to being in the role of a superintendent in a school district. I think, what have I learned? Boy, I think it's a journey of self-discovery, really, like this path that you take. And you can't really, I don't know if you make sense of it until you get to a certain age and you look back and you go, oh, well, that led me to that, which led me to that, which led me to that. And I think probably what I've learned through it all, and I can get into some specifics of what that journey was, but was really, it's a journey, I think, like any social practitioner who goes from a novice to an expert. I think of Martin, I've been in your classroom, right? I know what that looks like, and I know what the expertise looks like. I think we start all of this stuff at a very intuitive level. We care, we're community-oriented, we love children, like we're drawn to supporting people. Right. We can't help ourselves. And then you move through different phases and different experiences where you start to actually know what you're doing. And you know what you're doing. You move from this place of you just wanted to help and make things better to going, hey, when I do that, that's what the outcome is.
It's quite liberating because you suddenly go, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
now I know, right? You're not just trying to be somebody else or watching what someone else does down the hall. We all have that imposter syndrome too, right? So when you get to that point, it is. Yeah.
Well, and I don't think good people, my experience is the imposter syndrome never leaves because you have a good day and you have a bad day and you think, geez, like they're going to find out today that. Exactly. But that journey, it's really revelatory, and I think there's things now that I know, and I know what the reaction of other people will be, and you're building, I don't know if this is the right word for it, but and again, I equate it very much like classrooms. You've got a group of individuals that you're cultivating a community in. So you really are shepherding, and you're learning how to shepherd, if that's appropriate to say. Hopefully with the good values. So that's what I've learned. If you want sort of that particular, it's like, I guess for me personally, I was always drawn, like I think anybody that comes in and stays in education is almost vocationally, like how do you care for others? So I went to, we had a denominational school system, so it wasn't rich or poor, it just was what it was. Right. And so I ended up going to, my high school was Gonzaga, it was an all-boys sort of Jesuit high school, but it was, we weren't rich people, or it was everybody, and but volunteerism was a big part of it. And from a very early age, I volunteered at the Children's Hospital with children who were on what's called the psychiatric ward at the time, as well as the CNIB. But anyway, psychiatric ward had the biggest impact on me, and that's why I learned that I was good with others that were struggling, and that's what I wanted to do. And so anyway, that journey took me through education, and then I came to BC, and that took me into teaching, and then I wanted to be a counselor, but then I found out about school psychology, so I became a school psychologist, and then I learned a lot about systems and how to support not just an individual, but if we now support those that are doing the work with individuals, more can happen. Anyway, and then I ended up in Sea to Sky and had a really amazing journey there, and for 8 years. And then I went to Surrey as a director for curriculum and transitioned to support services and got to do some amazing things with amazing people. And thankfully, I was naive enough that I could just do it without worrying about ego and stuff.
That's often the key, right?
It's often the key. Like, I didn't know what I didn't know. Right? Yeah, you just do it. And and with that, though, of course, you learn and grow. And then ultimately having the opportunity to come to North Van. And I think as we were chatting before this started around that idea of school development and how do you support a system in that way culturally. Anyway, I won't go too far in that because you guys don't need to hear all that stuff.
Fantastic. So are there any values or outlooks on life that from your upbringing in Newfoundland that you bring that inform your approach for work? That's
an awesome question. It really is. I think, so this may sound odd, right? So I'm always drawn to people who have sayings. My mom was a famous for having sayings, crazy sayings, these Irish things that come from nowhere. But a big saying in Newfoundland, and this ties in, is don't get too big in your way. Okay. Now, what that means, if you were, hopefully you've been to Newfoundland. If not, I'd encourage you to go. But people in Newfoundland, they don't really care what you do. And in fact, if you want to impress upon them what you do, you might find yourself on the outside of a group. because generally speaking, it's not about that, right? We all get to make our different roles. We get to make different decisions, but you're not valued for that, at least. So don't get too big in your way. It's a value statement. It always is in my head, and it keeps me very much like, I guess humble. Like some people think of different roles you need to act in. Anyway, so I think that's a big one. But the other one that's linked to it is community, and it's more of, I grew up in a time when the outports were very much alive and well. There was lots of small, but both my parents are from a little place called St. Vincent's in St. Mary's Bay. And it's a community with, I think its max might have been 1,200 people, but when they were leaving, it was probably maybe less than, 500. And now there's, very few people there because the inshore fishery sort of died away. But that notion of you are all, and maybe that's why don't get too big in your way was a saying, because that's antithetical to being in community, right? If you see yourself as above the community, well, you're not part of the community. So those two things, I think, they're just ensconced in my DNA. Like yeah.
I could see that. Like when my kids were young, I bought a Westphalia. I took a leave and we went across Canada for 3 months.
Okay.
And the best part of the trip was the 3 weeks in Newfoundland, and just right away, like I've never been in a place where no matter where you were, someone would come and tell you a story.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And include you in the conversation and just tell you about how the cod industry used to be, or whatever it was at that moment. Sure. And it was 3 weeks. It was September at that time, and it was beautiful sunshine. It was the best weather, right? Yep. It was not what you hear about Newfoundland.
Well, September and October are our best months. Yeah. Halfway through October, then it gets iffy. Yeah. And it's not uncommon to be in an outport at that time. And if somebody was stopped in the middle of the road having a conversation with somebody, you might as well just wait, because they could be there for. Yeah. I can't speak to the now. I've been gone a long time culturally. I do go back, but it was a wonderful place to have grown up.
I have the same thing. I come from southwestern Ontario, from a farming community.
Oh, yeah.
So we band together. But on the Sundays when you go for a drive, there'll be 2 farmers in the car in front of you, and they're going about somewhere between 10 to 20 kilometers and looking at the crops.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, and you just drive the same speed.
Just relax. It's okay.
Okay, just to change direction a bit.
Yeah.
Is there someone in your life who had the biggest impact on you and your journey?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Like I said, you can reflect back on things. It's hard for me to say one person. I mean, you can always do that, but I think there's been a handful of people that have given me different things, and of course all kinds of people who give you little things that help you grow. I always go to sort of my mom and my dad. They're different people, but my dad would have been someone who would have helped anybody, but he also understood that people weren't looking to change, right? So he would, if you looking for guidance or support, he'd be more than happy to go out of his way that, but also recognizing that most people in life really want to tell you their troubles, but they don't really want that, And my mom was, my mom was an amazing teacher, and just a beautiful person in that way. And so that was her way of being or thinking about others was, again, a big feature. But I had 2 other people. Like I worked with a guy in Sea to Sky in my first sort of venture into leadership. And I can remember trying to write a message, and I was trying to be all smart and, fancy words. And he leaned over my shoulder and he'd say, "Pius, what is it you want to say?" So I tell him what I want to say. He said, "Well, just say it."
Yes.
Right? But it's a magical thing, really. And then the biggest influence probably on how I think or helped iron sharpens iron would have been a gentleman named Rick Ryan. He retired now. He was last at the deputy superintendent in Richmond. But we were directors together in Surrey. And that was really interesting having you often don't get a partner to work with close like that. And we would do nerdy kinds of things. Like we made a commitment to read all of these historic works and talk about them from a perspective of what does this mean for leadership. Like we read The Praise of Folly by Erasmus, of course Plato's Republic, Machiavellian's Mediations by Marcus Aurelius. From the perspective, we used to get frustrated. And it's great having a partner like this because they really strengthen you, like you two.
Yes.
but it's we would be always frustrated with the flavor of the day. Like everybody wrote a new book or another thing happened, and everybody in education was like, "Hang on now, like there's been great thinkers in the past. How do we?" Anyway, it's interesting.
Bring him back.
Yeah, he was a very wise guy, and come back to very simple things. But yeah.
Okay. So what do you see as your greatest achievement?
Greatest achievement. I've been very fortunate. I remember watching a pop singer one time, and the interviewer was asking him about luck. He was very lucky, and he said, "I'm not lucky." He said, "It's hard work and opportunity coming together, right? I mean, then we call it luck." But I've had a number of things I think have changed how people do their work. I mean, I don't know. Like I was the president of BC Case for like 11 years, and so I guess I had to have an influence there. So the work I've done in Surrey around the whole LST and working with that was, I think, really good work because it helps shape and frame how people think about the work, right? And that all has a cascading effect. But probably the biggest thing I'm probably most proud of at that through my career was the development of the Welcome Centre in Surrey. That was the first Welcome Centre in the country at a time when Surrey was expanding by 10,000 residents a year. I don't know where it is right now, but it was magical work, and I got to do everything from literally finding the site right across from the Superstore in King George to building a conception of how you support people. And you guys have heard this, right? Universal targeting intensive. It became a mantra very young for me because people were coming and they were very different. We would have Karen refugees who needed to learn how to use like indoor plumbing to people who just needed a license. So I've really felt it was revolutionary and again made a difference in so many people's lives. But then I think of the opportunities with North Van and like I don't know, with still early days, I guess, but that building of how do we look at ourselves, like and school planning, that process to me was really important. And I know, Martin, you were part of that, but that conversation...
And you really brought a different angle to it, I think, when you started that up.
Yeah, well, the whole concept of what makes a good school, and we have agency, and it's not a principal's responsibility, or it's ours. And now, cultivating that with the limited time that people have and the business of their jobs. But anyway, that's a lot. But I guess I'm proud of being able to participate in all that, and all the good people that were part of that stuff.
Yeah. And for that school planning, I like the way you simplified it to that. And sometimes we get too big with things that are so complicated, we forget what do we really want to know here. Yeah. And that kind of leads to my next question in terms of this complex world we're now facing with so many issues. What qualities do you think we need in leadership? Whether it's at the school level or international level, take it as you will. But what are we looking for?
I think that's a great question, and I think there's leadership especially in public schooling. There's so many levels to leadership, right? And everybody has a responsibility in leading other human beings towards a better future, right? So number one, I think people need to think that way, right? I think. The two thinkers that come to mind is Margaret Wheatley, who talks about her last book was called Who Do We Wish to Be? I'd recommend it. And then a man named Thomas Friedman. And both comment on community. And anyway, I'll come back to that in a second. To me, the two biggest qualities, one, systemic thinking. And what I mean by that is leaders need to understand that everything you do has a ripple effect to the other thing you do. So from the moment you walk through the door or don't walk through the door, how you include people, how you say hello to people, even if you're having a bad day, all of these little things are not little things. They're all connected. And so to be able to from a leader's perspective, be able to see that, not everybody can see that. And I think if you pay attention to it, you start to see more of it. You see how the threads are woven together into a tapestry, right? So that's one. And the second one is a real appreciation for building community. Like that. Like you are responsible for a community of people. This is not about you. And again, I would say that's at every level of our system.
And don't you think that's the foundation? Like, you got to start with that. You could have the biggest ideas in the world that on paper look amazing, but if you don't talk about those connections and building that community, it will fall apart. To what end, right? It's a people enterprise, and I guess linked to that, it's not about you, right? And that sometimes that maturity. If you come into leadership, if you come into work, and you think I'm going to be X. Like, generally speaking, maybe some people get there, but like most of my experience have been people don't come in with that as my goal is they come in and they just do good work. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they're doing this work, and then
Yeah. Anyway.
It snowballs.
It can, one hopes, right? But those would be the two biggest qualities, and they're equally complex, right? Because if you think about that notion of systems understanding or thinking, well, ultimately that is community, right? So if you think about the health of the community, there's so many things that are linked to that health of that community, and for you to keep that in your mind or to learn and grow with it from sort of a novice to more of an expert, right? It's wonderful, but I mean, again, right? You think of your journey from novice to
Okay. Well, leadership can be challenging and stressful.
Yeah.
So what do you do to find calm?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. It's funny. It's changed throughout my career. In this role now, I have to be really mindful of staying well. Because it is very stressful. So like simple things like I really can't drink very much or any of that kind of stuff. I have to make sure I get to bed. I can't watch TV at certain times. It's just because it's very consuming. And if you do that, you just start to fall apart. I think even anxiety wise, because there's so many things. But I do a couple of things on during work. So from when school's in session, it's full on, right, as you know. So, but I do get up early and I read. Generally speaking, I read for about 15 minutes every day in the morning, and it settles my ADHD brain. But it also gives me a calm that I've done something for me, and then I can give over my day. Right, I've done that. Now everyone else can have my day. And it has other benefits. And then on the weekends, I'm really, I guess I turn into an introvert. Like my wife is doing a leadership role now, and it's been interesting because she starts to understand like all of the stresses and things from the week. You really just need solitude. Yeah. And as my kids are getting older, I'm finding more space for that. And I'll go to my kids. My youngest guy is 15, so I'll go to his games, and that's beautiful. Yeah. When I'm not in session, I play music. Like I'm a guitar player, and I play a lot of different instruments.
I was going to ask because I know you play guitar, that was a way you could find calm too.
It's hard. I noodle a little bit because there's always a guitar around, but it's when I get time off. It's like I imagine what that future utopian world looks like when I'm retired. Where after in the summertime about probably about 4 weeks in, I start playing a lot, and then I play so much. It's a wonderful thing.
I'm only now, because I've always dabbled with guitar, but now that I've had retirement, my wife bought me a Morgan guitar for retirement. He's actually a North Van guy that makes these wonderful guitars.
Yeah, I'm more familiar.
He's made one for Neil Young and Sarah McLachlan, so I'm feeling the calluses on my fingers because I'm getting to it now, and it's a good feeling.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it.
Thinking about leadership and thinking of the world, and what do you think is the greatest challenge facing leaders today?
Yeah, I think we talked about it a little bit already. I do think there's a great analysis done by a man named Manuel Castells. He wrote a book called The Rise of the Network Society. It's a few years back now, but was very prescient, right? It spoke to the future. And there's a new book now, Nexus, by another gentleman it's quite good. But Manuel Castells is insightful because he spoke about this network society, right? How interconnected we all become, while at the same time, people are very discomforted by that, right? As a human being, we were brought up in little villages sort of thing. And so our sense of self gets fragmented. And so what happens is the natural reaction to that in society is fundamentalism. Right? Because this is too amorphous for me, so I need to find my group. And that's the group. So we're going to make, you see it, right, in the politics of the world, make America great at the expense of, so I think the biggest challenge for leaders, and again, I guess it depends what people conceive leadership to be, right? But if I believe leadership is about building our communities and supporting the human beings, then I think the biggest challenge is that politicization and the fundamentalist thinking without a real deep concern. Because once you line up with a certain more fundamentalist perspective or binary perspective, you start caring about that diversity. You stop caring about people's needs and the damage you can do. And I guess I find that concerning. And I think leaders at every level, what I wish for them to be able to do is recognize that and act differently.
I think, and it goes back to something you said earlier about the connections and community. I think we're losing community. And even because it was recently a snowy day here in North Vancouver.
That's right. I heard about that.
Yeah. But it was amazing because I went out and it was a community again in a way you don't see other times of the year because everyone's inside their house or on their devices. Everybody was out and the smiles you saw, and it felt like going back to another time. And, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to be like Trump and you got to go back to some good old days because there's a lot of things we've moved on from and they're positive. Sure. But in terms of community and people finding solace in that, I think we've lost that. And that I just noticed it on the faces of everyone.
Yeah, I think it's a great observation because I think this is the tension, right? And this is part of the leadership thing. We North America in particular, we have such an individualistic notion of success and then this drive. And we see it really in North Vancouver because, of course, we're upper middle class community and kids don't play in their neighborhoods anymore. They're all in sports and there's all these academies and there's all these, and everybody feels like they can't waste any time. And living is almost like a waste of time, right? So a snow day, I think it's fascinating psychologically that it's almost mythological, right? It gives kids and gives adults this notion of, I've got to go out but what a beautiful thing, right? And so I do worry about that. I worry about this whole urbanization and densification that we're experiencing. And one, I do think that makes public schooling even more important in regards to the work that we do, because nobody builds community like we do. While at the same time, I'm concerned about what does this look like if we're not doing that work. Like I mentioned earlier, Thomas Friedman wrote a book called. You can see I read every morning, right? So it comes out, right? It's kind of a nerdy thing. My friends from back east would be like, "Oh God, whatever happened to him?" But he talked about a time in the 70s in Minnesota where, if you track back in time, a lot of the leaders in the United States through the 90s and stuff came from this small town in Minnesota. And then he did an analysis of, I always think of there's blue zones in the world where people live longer. Well, I want to, envision, could there be green zones? Like there can be places, Margaret Wheatley talks about this too, there can be places like North Vancouver, right, separated by bridges from other parts, where it could be just a really beautiful community to be in. Yeah. But it's the constant slog because most people have been, maybe brought up or inculcated in different views from different places, and I hear from them sometimes where it's very individualistic versus how are we really talking about each other on a Friday night when people are sitting around having a glass of wine or a non-alcoholic beverage, and they're talking about their community and their experience with schooling. Where are they with that? Because I know most of the parents' experience with children in our school is excellent. Yes. But of course, we all know where people will tend to go are stories that are more. So we all have a responsibility. Like every community member in here, if you want to live in a great community and want your kids to thrive, social generative experiences, you have a role. Yeah. Yes. So I don't know. That's what I would hope to, get in people's heads.
It's those things where I know as a classroom teacher, you go on in that solitary environment, but when you have those parents who come by and say, I just want to say, my son or my daughter talks more about school this year than they ever have before.
Isn't that great?
Right? And it's great because you continue to work that process. Yeah. Right? And then you want the feedback. I said, I think I'm doing well, but what do other people think about it? When we start sharing those ideas in a positive sense, it really helps push things forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's wonderful.
How can you instill leadership to individuals in our district?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Again, back to this whole notion of being a systems person, right? I mean, that's probably a fancy word for it. But you think about every conversation that you have. Like, how many kids have you influenced where you can't even remember, but you said something to them and they took that away, right? So I do think there's a part of this, which is literally every conversation you have an opportunity to instill a sense of belonging and a way of thinking about the world, right? So that's small. But I guess I'm in that position where we get to select who are going to be the formal leaders of schools, right? And so what are the values that we want to instill in people? We've done a lot of work this last couple of years on what we call compassionate systems leadership, right? So how do you show up and understand systems and space, et cetera? I think there's a myriad of things, but I also think, I'm a big fan of I'm a big fan of connecting people across schools, right? And so we started and more seriously this year a network learning community in our family of schools with intermediate teachers and primary teachers, where teachers from different schools within that family come together, minimum of 4 times a year, to talk about a focus on practice. But I think that's another example of you're building community. Like, as you know, like when you talk to a colleague, and especially if it's a colleague who's outside of your culture, of your school, and you're talking about practice, it removes all that power dynamics, and you can actually build relationships in the. So I think there's a myriad of things, right, that you can do. I think of our dinner and dialogue around school planning. And again, there's still always work to be done, but how do you bring people to a genuine space of a democratic conversation about, right? What are the things because, in my experience is that if you ask people for example, what is a good school, or what's a good person, or what does it mean to be educated, you're going to get
it's all over. It's all over,
right?
Yeah.
It's but with that you end up coming down. If you keep distill it, you'll get down to a few things, right? And that's the beautiful thing, because everybody starts going, oh, so we're not on the wrong. We're on similar pages. We actually agree.
Yes.
Let's go.
Values.
Yeah.
Are there certain things, and you've probably touched on it a bit, but in terms of the leadership you're looking for in the district with VPs, directors, principals, superintendents, assistant superintendents, that you're looking for in the next generation as they come in, dealing with this world that we've talked about, maybe lacking community? What do you look for in that kind of person?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's a handful of things. You look for people who, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but I would say sometimes like a dog on a bone, right? You look for people who every day when they come to work, they're trying to hit a home run. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they just every day. It's like they
might miss.
They might miss, but they can't help themselves. It's like, no, I'm gonna, and so they're constantly in that cycle of trying to make things better, right? So that's I guess a disposition or a quality that they just keep showing up, and this is who they are. But then the two other things I do think about is like, where is their value system? Like, what do they value, right? And you need to be able to be principled and be able to articulate what you do value, so you're not shifting with the winds because individuals have very different views where the community could be. So then there's that. With that, there's that maturity of and people come at different stages, right? Have intuitive to intentional, how to develop community. Like, what are the intentional things that you can do that, right? And even some of them, successful people I've seen don't necessarily have to be too strategic. They just need to be, present in the playground, talking to the parents, talking to the teachers, going around, getting to know people. Like, you can be successful doing that, but then take it to our hope would be take it to the next level, right? And then, of course, instill in our good people that cascading effect where each one of our people who manages a classroom community, they're building a community. And that community links to the room next door, which links to the school, which links to, and that, Roy, you were sharing, like you're TOCing a little bit right now, and you can tell right away when you walk into a school.
You can get the feel.
You get the feel, right? You just know it, right?
And I like it because I'll go into a staff room and I'm carrying a different lens now.
Yeah, for sure.
Than the classroom teachers there, and I can actually hear things differently because I have that different lens.
Yeah.
I'm allowing myself to hear things differently.
Yeah.
And it's I love this district, and I love going into those staff rooms, and I love going to those schools.
Yeah. No, we've great people.
Yeah, they're amazing people. What is the biggest risk that you have taken?
Jeez. I was going to make a joke. I think the biggest risk my wife took was marrying me. But no, I've moved, right? Like, there's a few ways of looking at that for me. One, like leaving Newfoundland as a cherub, right, as a 24-year-old boy into the big wide, like that's
a big risk.
It's a risk, yeah. And then I was getting really. I've been fortunate that. I've worked hard at different roles, and I remember when I moved to Langley to be a school psychologist at that time, and I really learned a lot, and I worked hard, and I think I was was good. I was, people commented that, I was helpful. But a job came up in Squamish, and me and my wife, let's go. And then, of course, I did the same thing when I left Squamish. I was on a path, arguably, to potentially, I was a director when I left there. There was only 2 directors and a superintendent. So to go to Surrey, it was like from small to massive. And, and then, of course, to come here. And coming here was probably the biggest one, to be honest, because, as you go through your career, you build your credibility, right? You do things, and people are with you, and every time you go somewhere new, they don't know you. They don't know what you did. Right. They don't care what you did. And all of a sudden, it's like you're like, but I'm pretty good. Like, I used to do this, and they don't. Yes. Now you got to start over again. And I found the more expertise you got, and the older you got, that was even harder, because you were going right back to the beginning again, right? And then you had to continue over time. So. Yeah, I mean, the professional challenges outside of that, that's personal challenges, I guess, from a professional perspective. But some of the biggest risks have been hiring, being committed to hiring certain people that others felt differently about, right? And but seeing those qualities, and thankfully, in my view, being proven right by their good work. But those are risks, especially the higher up you go in an organization, because it becomes political, and people don't know the internal workings, and but they'll have very strong views from the outside, and you may go against that view, and that becomes risky.
When you talked about moving on and going to different places, it made me think, that's why I like to go to different schools and work at different places and do different jobs, because sometimes you wondered, everyone said, "Oh, you're doing a great job," but is it just because of your reputation? It became easy because everyone wants you to be, so you go somewhere new and you have to prove yourself again, and you realize, okay, good, no, it's working out here too. Yes. And I found that kind of reinforcing. It wasn't just some myth that developed.
Well, I think that's very astute, because I think for you personally, it's personal, you overcome that, and then I think when people do that, they tend to reflect on their practice more, because you think, am I crazy? Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's cool.
I'm just going to take it globally for a second,
okay,
and historically, because I think you like history as well. And looking back, is there any person or leader in history that you really admire and stands out for you?
That's interesting. History. It's hard to contextualize. I got 2 things come to mind. One, I do think of Marcus Aurelius, and the reason because he wrote Meditations, right? And I mean, who knows what it would have been like to live under his rule. However, the idea that somebody who is literally the most powerful person in the world thought about values and thought about temperance and thought about that, to me, is compelling. So that does come to mind. But I often think, I think about the book Good to Great. Okay, now if you haven't read it, it's sort of an analysis of companies that were, good and those that became great. But in it, he gives an example of study of leadership, and he mentions 2 people. He mentions Lee Iacocca, whom everybody knew about in the 80s because he wrote these books. But he also comments that Lee Iacocca drove Chrysler into the ground. He was from a perspective, a terrible organizational leader. Now, who am I to say? But this is what the book says. And then he commented on another gentleman, I believe it worked in a vacuum company or something like that, who year over year for 20 years was the top performing, and people loved working with him, and nobody could remember his name, and I can't remember his name either. And so, but it always stands out to me because you work, especially in certain roles. Some people think that you need to be flashy, you need to be out in front, you need to be whatever that is, and I really don't believe that in the sense that, of course, there's a time and a place, but it's more about all of those other pieces, right, and people doing the good work in a values-based organization. So, yeah, those things come to mind.
Okay.
Before we have one final one, but before that, is there, Roy, a final question we could do there? And then we'll end with the one about the nugget.
I have one, and I started out talking about it. We have a new school being developed here in North Vancouver.
Yes.
And because it's new, how will you approach it from a leadership point of view, being able to lay that foundation of creating a social environment that connects with the community to, you're going to open the door and then how are you going to move forward on that day?
That's a great question, and I think I appreciate you asking it because it puts into light that opportunity, right? So we certainly have started talking because we're going to have to look at boundary changes and all that kind of stuff as the new community forms. But the mantra, the umbrella line that sort of we put over it, or I believe is important, is literally, in quotations, building a community. Because that's what we're doing. So with that lens, we got to think of all of the activities that can happen before the school opens, and then of course in the first couple of years of the school being opening, that is the end in mind. So I think it's a beautiful opportunity to back to the values that we've talked about, and so you take any number of things that in this conversation regarding to who we choose as the principal of the school, how staff are chosen, how staff are coming in with this mindset, right? That you are coming in, you're not just coming in to teach grade 5. You're coming in to build this community.
Yes.
You're not joining a community already in existence and you need to navigate. No. You have a real role here. I think it's super exciting. I would love to be a part of that as a staff person, and I think also too. I think again, these are details, and I'm sure people will have better thoughts than me. But I think anytime you build things, you have to be mindful of what's that continuum, right? So what's the continuum of really well seasoned educators? What are some people who are starting in their career, mid career? What's that balance so that you're really building, hopefully, a vibrant community? And then of course, how do we build with our little ones and our parents coming in? And I think it's going to be super exciting. What an opportunity to hopefully, in their minds, create a vision of what a community is.
Yes. Yeah, to start it from the beginning, right? What a wonderful moment.
Yeah, super exciting.
So thank you. We always we have one final question, and in our podcast we always have one nugget that we kind of say this is a nugget you can use in your classroom. And you've presented many nuggets, Pius, and we really appreciate that. Is there, on the topic of leadership, is there one nugget you could say, think about this as we end our conversation, that is kind of how you put your view of leadership into one little golden nugget? What would it be?
Oh, good Lord. I don't know if I can do one.
Yeah, and maybe it's such a big topic that you just don't want to make it sound trite, or
yes,
Yeah. Yes, that's the hardest thing. I think it's like parenting, and it's like a lot of things in our life. A friend of mine once said to me, "Relax, it's going to be okay." Yeah, and I when he first said it, I was like, how's that helpful? But to be honest, like so much of life, we get worried about this, we're worried about that, and Kahneman talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking, and we're so algorithmically oriented that something happens and we react to it. So how do we relax and allow for give it time so your understandings come in? So probably that's probably the biggest piece of advice, but. The other nugget is, it's like any other practice. It takes many years, and you'll never be there. I shared with principals at the beginning of the year a little story about Gary Cooper, the actor, right? And there's a notorious story that he was on his deathbed, and he says, it's a shame I'm dying. I'm just getting the hang of this thing, right? Yeah. I think we all feel like that, right?
That's what life is, right?
That's what life is, right?
Yeah.
So I guess.
Yeah, and that made me think of John Lennon had a quote saying, everything will be fine in the end, and if it's not fine, then it's not the end. Right?
Yes, that's true. Unfortunately, true. Anyhow.
So thank you so much, Pius. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
It's been amazing. I've learned lots, and it's nice just having this opportunity to sit across the table from you and just chat.
Yeah. It would be nice if we could do this on a regular basis with people, But this, back to our earlier comment about a snow day, right? We're all so darn busy.
Yes.
And yet we get to create our own world in some respects. So I'm shocked at how we, as human beings, we keep getting technologies that are supposed to make our lives better, but we keep making it busier.
It's very ironic.
What's wrong with us?
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
And we all jump into it, and now I need this new app.
Yeah,
right?
there you go. Right?
Maybe just go outside and play in the snow.
Hey, perfect metaphor.
Play in the snow.
Thank you.
All right.
So here we are with our guests at the NVTA office. We have Katrina Russell and Robin Deleurme. Thank you for joining us. They are the first vice president, no, the second vice. Robin has been the first vice president and you've also been the president of the NVTA. Yeah. And for those of you who are not part of North Van, the NVTA is the North Van Teachers Association, which is the local union. And Katrina, you are the president of the NVTA.
President of the NVTA.
Fantastic.
Yeah, first president of the NVTA, yeah.
And loving every minute of it.
On my way out, I can say, loving every minute of it.
What can I ask before we always have a little icebreaker, but before that, can I ask what got you involved in the NVTA?
So Pat Fong was the chief staff rep at the school I was teaching at, Larson Elementary School, and she was looking at her retirement and, kind of needing a succession plan, and she tapped me on the shoulder to be alternate rep. So she started dragging me to rep assemblies. It must have been in 2014. Maybe 2013, 2014, right around there. And she started dragging me to the rep assemblies and having me provide the summaries back to the staff committees. And so she was the first to reel me in.
It's often that senior teacher, right? That has been there that kind of sees and goes, hey.
Wouldn't you like to be part of a wonderful organization?
Right. And then while I was at the rep assemblies, I think Carolyn Penna tapped me on the shoulder to be to put my name forward as secretary for the NVTA executive. Right. And then
before you know it,
I knew it. Yeah.
Robin, what brought you to the
well, I actually started in the union in a former district that I was at in Chaco, which was I was teaching in Fraser Lake. I was in my third year teaching, and I was the alternate for being on the negotiating team for a new round of bargaining, and we were doing local bargaining at that time. And unfortunately, the person one of the people who were on the bargaining committee fell off her horse. And so I no longer was the alternate, but in my third year teaching, I was sitting at the negotiating table with the board, bargaining. So that's how I first got involved. And then there hasn't been a year likely since then that I haven't been in one shape or form, and working either in bargaining or as a staff rep or going to, BCTF, annual general meetings, etc. Yeah. So it probably hasn't been a year since 93, which was my third year, 1993.
30 years ago.
Yeah. So that's how I got started.
Wonderful. So we ready for icebreaker time?
That's right.
Okay.
We do the ABC 1, 2, 3, and this is just to make you feel comfortable. And I'm going to do the ABC. Martin's going to do 1, 2, 3, and just respond with what you think.
First thing that pops in your head.
First thing that pops in.
There's no right or wrong here.
All right. Recess or lunch?
Jeez. Recess. This is an either or question?
Yes.
Recess
or lunch?
Lunch. Well, I guess lunch is just longer. It's great.
Okay.
Is that the question?
Yeah, that's fine. There's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong. How about you, Robin?
Well, since I'm a high school teacher, we didn't have recess.
Okay.
So we have to say lunch.
I'll get a little coffee break. Right. 5 minutes.
5 minute break.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go. Red or blue?
I'm just thinking purple. I'm really sorry, which of course makes me think of, what was the name of that book? The Purple, can't remember the name of the book.
Purple Elephant.
No. It was a, I don't know, it was a lovely children's story.
Okay.
Anyway, anyway.
Robin.
I'll have to look it up.
Red.
Red, okay. All right. Math or PE?
Oh, definitely math, 100%.
Math, 100%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. No hesitation.
No hesitation there.
No.
All right.
Fiction or nonfiction?
Nonfiction.
Oh, it really depends on my mood. Yeah, absolutely. The last book that I read was nonfiction, but it was took me months and months and months to read it. So, but yeah, fiction both changed my mind. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Apple or banana?
Well, I know Robin's going to pick banana.
Apple.
Can't stand bananas.
Can't stand bananas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love banana.
Charlene's like that.
Yeah.
Even the smell of them, she runs.
Me too.
So we touched on this a little bit, but who was your favorite teacher and why?
Okay. My favorite teacher
Yes.
was Madame Lemay.
Okay.
She was my history teacher. She was dynamic. She cared about her students. She was very well. She was organized, but I was in high school in the 80s in Quebec. By being in high school in the 80s, we learned about residential school. We learned about colonization and the harms on the Indigenous people. We learned about
You're ahead of the times.
yeah, we really learned about misogyny and the feminist movement through this teacher. She was fantastic, and she unfortunately passed away when I was in grade 11, which is the last year of secondary in Quebec. She had blood cancer, and the whole school was quite saddened by that passing. But she was my favorite teacher. The teacher that had the biggest influence on me, though, it was my grade 7 math teacher.
Okay, tell us about her.
Who, so she was a nun, and she started teaching as a nun back in the day when you didn't need a teaching certificate. You could teach because the Catholic Church was part of the system, right? So she had to have been.
God gave you the teaching certificate.
Exactly. Oh yeah, absolutely. So she was kind of like still in the system, right?
From that,
that. And she must have been 70 years old. She was this teeny tiny little woman who, when she was sitting at her desk, her feet didn't touch the ground. And she would she would wave her feet back and forth as she was sitting at her desk. And she was a hard ass. Like if you didn't hand things in that looked just right, she would send them back and make you redo them. She was very particular about how you communicated your math thinking and your processes. Everything had to be really clear, really tidy, and you could not skip a step. And if you did, it got sent back to you and you had to redo it. I hated her.
Oh.
She was like, as students, we teased her behind her back. It was just pretty universal. We hated this teacher.
And this is your favorite teacher.
Fast forward 2 years, I'm in grade 9 math, and I'm realizing that I'm still using everything that I learned in grade 7 to get me through grade 9 math.
Yeah.
Where I was not paying attention to my teacher. I was a lazy student in general, right? So I kind of I needed that hard ass to get me to do what I needed to. And I used what I learned in grade 7 all the way through high school and into my early years.
But you realized that by grade 9?
I realized
Which
that.
is amazing. Most grade 9s, I don't think.
Would have realized that
at that moment, knowing grade 9 students. Right?
Well, I knew how little I was paying attention and how little work I was actually putting into my my effort that I was putting in, and I was still doing really well.
Right,
and I knew that it was because of the discipline that she provided me in terms of disciplinative thought and process was all I needed really to get through.
Robin, any favorite teacher that pops in your mind?
Yeah, I probably would say I have two. One was a math teacher and one was a chemistry teacher, which is probably why I did my degree with a double major in chemistry and math. The chemistry teacher, Mr. Turner was his name. He was a bit of an odd, quirky kind of guy. Many people would think that he didn't care, that he just did his job because he was kind of monotone, kind of boring sounding and whatever. But
like in Ferris Bueller's Day Off?
Yeah. But I got to know that he really did care because when you sloughed off, like I would once in a while in high school, I'd get a little note.
He'd call you on it.
Exactly. And he'd say, I know you can do better. And I know you've given me better work. So he was just kind of that type of silent encouraging guy without being, so I really quite liked him. And then the math teacher, different kind of character, much more dynamic, quite a bit younger. Most of the students in his class liked him. And I think for him, I think his love for mathematics was probably the biggest plus. Is it gave me a love of mathematics,
infectious kind of,
it wasn't just a thing to do. Like most people, my dental hygienist that I spoke to yesterday said, "Oh, I'm not good at math. I never was good at math."
Yeah.
I almost hear that universally.
Yeah.
And so, he gave me the love for math, and I think that's why he was one of my favorite teachers.
Yeah. I'm going to throw in the surprise one, okay? Here we go.
Okay.
Roy or Martin?
Well, okay, here's the thing. Roy, I don't know if you still have a dog, but you definitely are a dog person, right?
Yes.
So that's always I connect with dog people.
Thank you.
But I worked more closely with Martin.
Yes.
So I have more of that connection. So I can't.
Loaded. Okay. On the spot. You want to go there?
I have to say Martin. Sorry, Roy.
I expected that.
Okay.
Yeah, Martin, I never knew Martin very well before coming to work in the union office. Martin was the first vice president. He was the president when I came in as first vice president. And that was Martin's first year as president. I think it was his third year in the office. And I, having known Martin a little bit on the executive, I expected we'd be at odds most of the time because we're quite different in our way of thinking and our way of approaching things. But surprisingly, we worked very well together. And it was quite enjoyable working with Martin because we seemed to have opposites ways of approaching things, but we were able to play the devil's advocate for each other and try to get each other to come to, a certain way of thinking. And I think that's why I really enjoyed working with Martin in the office. Yeah. So it was not what I'd expected, but in the end, it was actually quite good.
Yeah, I'll throw it right back at you. I was quite nervous, actually, right, at first. Yeah. Right? With you with my first vice president, right? Just knowing our interactions on the executive, and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
It shows you, it takes just different facets of a character to kind of build something, right? You can't have the same type for everything.
Exactly.
Sometimes we were stronger than the separate parts kind of thing.
For sure.
Right? Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Good.
Right.
Thank you. Okay.
So I'm going to start off with a question. Could you share some of the supports that you offer for our members, for the MVTA members? What are some of the supports that you offer?
Well, I mean, it's going to sound strange, but probably the number one support we tend to offer in this office is that of counselor. I don't know, I want to put a percent on it, but a high percentage of the phone calls that we get, people really just want you to listen. And sometimes that could be a bit frustrating because sometimes you have to listen for 25 minutes and not get a word in. But I would say that that's certainly the number one support. Number two supports is simply understanding the collective agreement and how it operates and what their rights are. Wouldn't you say, Katrina? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly around leaves. So what people's rights are, what leaves are available to them, what the rights are around those leaves, the return from leave provisions, all of those are really important. Yeah. And then I would say that dovetails into medical leaves specifically. And so the NVTA works really closely with the BCTF to help people get the supports that they need through long-term medical leaves, getting medical accommodations. Yeah.
That's great.
It's huge.
A big part of our in North Vancouver is the fact we have staff committee, which is like the local union meetings at schools. Can you speak to the importance of those staff committee meetings that don't always, maybe not every school finds them as important as they should be? Could you speak to the power of a really strong staff committee or school union meeting that happen, every week or every 2 weeks?
Yeah.
How it can actually make the school run better.
It is interesting when I think about the schools where there is a really strong staff committee versus the schools where a staff committee, might not meet so frequently, and isn't as cohesive and doesn't draw as large a percentage of the staff. We definitely see a much more robust understanding of teachers' rights, including the leaves that we spoke about. But teachers are much more confident in their roles, much more confident in their positions. Staff committee is much more comfortable going to the principal with their concerns. And in schools where there is a lack of a robust staff committee presence, teachers are working more in silos and are not learning about their rights from each other, right? And so they are much more reliant on calling the NVTA office for support. And then we sometimes see people not being proactive enough and letting issues go for long periods of time without addressing them, which then puts us in a position where it's much harder to go back and fix it. It's much easier to fix things in a moving forward basis than to go back and try to fix things retroactively. And so both, and that happens both on the individual level and like at school-wide level, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with Katrina. Staff committees, since the late 80s, principals of schools used to be on the same sort of level as teachers in the school. We were colleagues. We were all, union members, part of BCTF. Yeah. And then, of course, in the late 80s, that changed through legislation that principals became management. And so it changed the dynamic in schools. And I think that a strong staff committee actually strengthens that divide of management and staff because it allows for the staff, as Katrina said, to voice a unified voice to the principal that this is the wishes of the staff, or this is what the staff would like. And I've had many principals over the years when I was a staff committee chair come to ask me, well, I'd like to try to do this. What do you think the staff would like? And my answer would always be, well, I'll have to ask the staff committee. And she would say, wow, come on, can't you give me a bit of an idea? What? And I said, no. I said, the staff committee decides for the staff what we do. And so I think the strength of it is a unified voice, that you're not dealing with the principal talking to individual silos, as Katrina referred to, where that can cause conflicts between other staff. Yeah. Whereas the staff committee provides that unified voice. And I think that's why a strong one is really important.
And do you think some administrators can see it as a positive too?
Absolutely.
Not just like, staff committee. And see
that principal I spoke about, she absolutely did. Like she always jarred me a little bit trying to get an answer, but she totally knew that I would get an answer from the staff and it would be a unified voice. Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I think that a good administrator recognizes that a strong staff committee actually makes their jobs easier, because there's going to be less of that conflict, right, that is created by the administrator having to deal with individual members on issues rather than
it's all above board. Here it is. Let's discuss it.
Okay. So then why do you think it's important for teachers to know their rights then? Like, how does that benefit teacher to know their rights? Looking through the collective agreement.
Well, I think that knowing their rights also helps them to know their responsibilities. Yeah. And I think that, collective agreement lays out what teachers can and can't do, so to speak. But it allows for, a level playing field. Often as a staff rep, I've heard from administrators, they refer to it as your collective agreement or the teacher's collective agreement, which is furthest from the truth. In fact, that's why it's called a collective agreement. It's agreement between the parties. And I think that when you're explaining to teachers where to find certain things in the collective agreement where they can know their rights, it helps them articulate a conversation with their administrator or perhaps HR to what their wishes are, or their knowledge of the collective agreement helps get to a place that is supportive and helpful. So I think that it is important for teachers to know their rights. There are a lot that don't read the collective agreement. There are a lot that don't bother with it. But I've always found that when you point them to a specific article in the collective agreement with regards to what they're talking about, that they are quite amazed that there's actually something written about what they thought about, what the issue was for them or whatever. Yeah. So I think it's really important, and I think not enough teachers actually spend a bit of time, not suggesting they take it to bed and read. You'd fall asleep. You'd fall asleep in a minute.
We just mentioned that the other day in
I was in a
podcast.
Yeah.
But I think that.
But how would you encourage them to do that then? I think you're right.
Well, actually,
how do we get them?
The best way to learn the collective agreement is actually to be a rep at a school. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're a staff rep, you're forced to read the collective agreement much more. And I would always encourage everyone to be a staff rep at one point in time, or a staff committee chair. People really shy away from that role, but you tend to really learn the collective agreement. And obviously, working in this office, you get an even more intimate understanding. Yeah. You even know on what side of what page a certain article is because of the way it looks, because you've looked at it so many times.
Are there things a staff committee can do to get maybe those teachers that are union shy, to get them more involved in the process and come to meetings and learn about their collective agreement?
You know what? I always ask that question about, from staff, because we have some schools that regularly bring over 30% of their staff to general meetings, for example, right? They have a really good, strong presence that shows up. And so those staffs have a strong voice at general meetings. And then they tend to also bring very interesting motions to the rep assemblies, right? That there's real robust understanding of their collective rights. Sometimes there are robust misunderstandings of their collective rights, but that's where we get an opportunity then to help bring a stronger, better understanding, right? When people, but I don't know, I really think breaking bread is the way to go, right? So
it's true.
It's amazing when I've brought treats to a staff committee meeting, the increase in attendance is huge. So, that's...
I just can hear it buzzing. It's
not mine.
Oh, is it me? Oh, it's me. It's here. Sorry, here I am looking around.
Yes, Martin.
I just hear it coming through.
Yes, I think
Robin says knowingly, I've been there.
It's any time that there's a free meal or a free snack or something, is just one thing off. Oh, I'm a little snacky right now. I'll go to this meeting and get a free thing and listen. That's how you draw teachers in.
Yeah.
Free lunch.
And unfortunately, I don't know how we can do that in a sustained way, right? Yeah. So that, it's not really the answer.
Yes.
Except, it could be done in a potluck kind of way, right? If each member on staff brought one thing once a month, not one thing once a month, one thing a year to a staff committee meeting, that could be enough to bring in a larger percentage of.
And I guess some people have to learn the hard way. It's not till they actually need the union, and then the union is there for them. They go, "Oh wow, right,
yeah." And we've heard that a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes I think of this job as a thankless job, except I get a lot of thanks from people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And it's amazing how we take for granted that people know things, right? And for the most part, they don't.
Right.
And so, we help them navigate a very complicated system sometimes.
And becoming more complicated, right? It's a harder job than ever. And that's why we need the union more than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So why is staffing season such a stressful time for teachers? And is there a way to ease that process?
I'll answer your second question first. No, I don't think there is a way to ease that process. It's staffing season is all about individual staff's security blanket, comfort of where they're teaching and what they're teaching. And so when that's in flux at staffing season, perhaps they are being transferred by the board, or perhaps they're surplused at a school, or in times in the past we've had layoffs and such. That whole time of year is everybody's year, part of the year that's very uncertain. And so I don't think you could give knowledge about it, you can help people through it, but I don't think there's a way to avoid it completely. It's human nature to be stressed when you're uncertain about what's going on in your life at the moment. What's happening next. And so I think that it's just the way it is.
Part of the job.
It is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and I think you answered both questions there.
Did I?
That is why staffing season is so stressful, is because it's a time of uncertainty, right, for members. And
I think go ahead, Katrina.
I was just going to say, like, I think when there's a little bit more certainty about the process and an understanding that, or when there's trust that the process is going to be done fairly, there's a reduction in the angst on staff. Even if it doesn't mean that you're going to get what you want in the following school year, it doesn't mean that, some people are still going to be surplused, but when there's a trust that the process is going to be transparent and fair, it reduces the angst.
Yeah. That's key.
I think also like part of staffing season, which we didn't touch on, is your assignment in the school. And so at every spring, everybody's potential assignment, even if they're not leaving the school, may change. So you might go from teaching a grade 5 to teaching a grade 7, or you might, go down to teaching a 4-5 or whatever. In high school, you might teach different subjects, etc. And so that time of year, that uncertainty, and sort of I find in conversations with teachers when we're trying to help them through the process, is they often look at some of that process as being unfair. Why did they get grade 4 when I wanted grade 4, or whatever? And
I've had grade 4 for 10 years.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And what I try to tell, in particular, I think at an elementary school, but it's even more complex at a secondary school, because you're dealing with, like many teachers and lots of different blocks. But at an elementary school, like
cross departments,
right? I try to tell people when they call, your principal does have a hard job during staffing, because they've got all these pieces that they have to fit together to staff a school. So there's many part-time people, there's many full-time people, and that puzzle has to get put together, because that's the job of the principals, to make sure his school is staffed. And if he has too many, well, then he or she has to surplus. If they don't have enough, then they've got to post jobs. But I try to tell them, you aren't going to get what you want all the time, because the principal has to put together all these pieces of a jigsaw puzzle to create staffing at a school. And I try to tell people that, and for the most part, it does alleviate their stress or their sense of their sense of unfairness in the process. They kind of go, well, okay, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense.
Okay, great. In British Columbia, we call our substitute teachers teaching on call, TTOCs. Are there any TTOC issues that have kind of come to the forefront of your mind that come up during these years, especially with shortages and other things like that?
Well, it's interesting, because the school district needs to staff the school system, and finding a balance of the right number of TTOCs to have on their list is a tricky place. We've actually been really fortunate in North Vancouver the past couple of years in terms of the failures to fill.
It's improved.
That's, the failures to fill being like when they don't have enough TTOCs to fill all of the absences due to illness and other reasons. And so we're seeing a definite improvement in those failures to fill, and so they're the issues that we've been seeing over the past 2 years have been more complaints from TTOCs not getting enough work.
Okay.
So it's not, that does ebb and flow throughout the school year. Right now, December has been really difficult. Apparently the retired teachers who are on the TTOC list are not as quick to pick up jobs in December because, they like to take longer vacations. So
have you found it like having retired teachers that's been like without that, we would be such.
I don't know what we would do.
The school district wouldn't survive without TTOCs that are retired teachers. So, it's not like in the past when, some people would say, well, don't teach don't TTOC when you're retired because you're taking away from young students, But if we didn't have that, we would have failure to fills a lot. I did a really, really rough count. And I believe that we're anywhere between a quarter and a third of our TTOCs are retired teachers. Yeah. So you can imagine if a third or even a quarter of that list disappeared, that we would be in, and what Katrina talks about the last couple of years, prior to that, we were dealing with thousands of failure to fills in a year.
Yeah.
Wow. I had no idea.
Down from that last year, and for the most part this year, I think we're dealing with, I don't know, under 100 even,
I think last year in total was between just over 100.
Yeah. So considerably different than 2021 and 2022, where there was a number of
sometimes 100 in a day.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was in the office, it was such an issue with failure to fill because then you have a librarian or an LST has to move into that role, and then students don't get those services that they
taking
right?
services in school.
Yeah. But I was speaking to a principal yesterday who was in a grade 4-5 class yesterday.
Good
because there because there was they had an absence that wasn't filled, and great on her. She didn't pull the librarian or the LST. She stepped in and taught that grade 4-5 class. Yeah. So we definitely love to see that. And when we do see principals stepping into the classroom roles when there's a failure to fill, it really increases the goodwill among the staff. And it makes them less resentful when they do miss non-instructional time or when, services are pulled, from time to time because they know that the principal is stepping up sometimes.
We're all in this together.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
What part of your role here do you find the most enjoyable? Share the joy.
And I don't know how much, I don't know.
Being on a podcast.
This in your podcast. I don't know if you're going to put this on your podcast, but when I'm fighting a fight that I know I'm going to win, because I know that we are on the right side of, of the law, essentially. That's fun. It's energizing, right? So it's frustrating that we have to fight those fights, but when I have a really strong conviction and a strong confidence in the process and in our position, it's fun.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good feeling.
And to get that validated on the through the process is exhilarating. Yeah. But
I think for me, as Martin, you will know, and Katrina definitely knows, people are not calling the union office when they're having a great day. It's just doesn't happen. No. Nobody calls. My day has been going. Right. How about you? It just doesn't happen. People always call with an issue.
Yes.
Problems, not problems, whatever they are, some form of issue. And I think the joy that I've got out of it, this being my 7th year working in the office, the joy that I get is knowing that I've helped somebody and knowing that they appreciate what I've done for them. And I think that, you're never going to hit that every time because sometimes there just isn't something that can help. But letting people know the information that they didn't know, but now this helps them alleviate a stress, alleviate a pressure on them. That to me just like it did when I was teaching with kids, that joy of having helped someone and having someone learn something from you. I can go home feeling like I made a difference today. I helped some people.
Yeah.
And I think that's in this job, you have to really grab those when you can, because they don't happen, fortunately, as often as you would like. Certainly not as much as when I was teaching. You'd find a lot more of that joy with the kids. Yeah. But here, not as much. But it does come, and it's usually comes several times a day. But you always have to take that
You have
home,
to, right?
rather than
Some of the negativity.
the other negative things that inevitably happen here, whether that be us dealing with the school district or just dealing with a member that's challenging.
Yes.
And so that's the part of the job I find that gives me joy.
Well, thank you. We so appreciate you taking the time, because being in this job, I know how busy you are. You don't have many moments to have two people come in and ask you questions. So we really appreciate this. And this is it's great for the listeners to hear about what the MVTA does and what the union does. And this has just been a joy for us.
Well, I was going to follow up though with that. Because, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Martin, when you were in the office, but there are those moments when you get somebody on the phone who is very, very heightened. And there's a satisfaction in hanging up the phone with a calm person on the other side.
To turn that around, right?
Yeah.
Change that narrative.
And it's giving them knowledge and a sense of support, right?
You made a difference in their day, right?
For that moment.
Yeah. Roy, anything to add?
No, this has been awesome.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This podcast is organic, taking shape with each episode. Building resiliency for teachers everywhere.
That sounds great.
And our website is stuntbrothers.ca.
That's stuntbrothers.ca.
We will chat again
after the bell.